Hey, welcome to another episode of Strive 365, the podcast dedicated to helping you push through challenges and thrive every day, no matter the odds. We are here to help guide you to live a better life, whether it be mentally, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And I am your host, Justin Arnold, in the amazing Rock Vox studio here in Rochester, New York. And joining us today is Jake Kauffman. I've known him for a little bit. He's a cool dude. He's the author of this new powerful book, Let Love In, The Pain Stops When the Truth Starts. Jake is a renowned speaker and leading voice in the field of overcoming trauma and achieving holistic well-being. Through his work, he shed light on the crucial but often overlooked connection between healing from past wounds and living a fulfilling life mentally, physically, and emotionally and spiritually. So you can see why he's a guest on this show. Today, we are going to dive deep in the principles and practices outlined in Jake's book and uncover the keys to unlocking our true potential. Whether you've experienced trauma or simply seek to live a more authentic and fulfilled life, I'm sure this episode will provide invaluable insights and actionable steps to help you thrive and strive 365. So, Jake, thanks for coming on, man. Why don't you introduce yourself to the viewers? We are on YouTube, we're on all social medias, and the listeners here today.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if I'll be able to do a better job than you just did, but thanks so much for having me here, Justin. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, for sure, man. Like we've known each other, we've chatted here, and I followed you for a little while, and I've seen the great things you're doing. When your book came out, I was like, man, this guy's going to definitely make a difference. So let's start there. Could you give us a brief overview of your book and what inspired you to write it?
Well, I will say that the book in many ways was a calling. It was a curse. As Charles Dickens once said, your calling is your curse. It's the thing that you can't not do. But as far as an overview of the book is a memoir mixed with self-help. So the focus of the book is actually how I overcame my own trauma, the pain from the past, so that I stopped recycling it into the present moment. So the book picks up a little over 10 years ago when I first acknowledged an experience that happened to me when I was a young teenager as sexual abuse. And then the journey that I went on years later to overcoming and ultimately transcending the pain from that experience, but also how that pain helped me back in the different areas of my life.
Yeah. So people have listened to my podcast. We have some similarities, but do you mind going a little bit in depth to where you feel comfortable, like that experience
Sure.
and what that was like?
Yeah, so it was an experience at Christian summer camp, and it happened in front of all of my friends, in fact, and was very much played off as this joke. And as a 12 or 13-year-old, I didn't know what to do with nor how to process that experience. And so I did what most young teenagers would do. I simply suppressed it. I pretended as if it didn't happen. And because it was more or less treated like a joke, I was able to brush it off. Unfortunately, because that incident didn't happen in secret or in silence, it kind of followed me around throughout middle school, throughout high school. I grew up in a town of 1,000 people, right? I went to the same church, same school with everyone, played the same sports with everyone. And so it kind of was this dark cloud hanging over my head for years growing up, that this experience had happened. That this man had taken advantage of me in front of a bunch of other people. That was probably a joke to begin with, but clearly went way too far and went way over the line and was very inappropriate. And it wasn't until I was probably in my late 20s, so we're talking about 15 years after the fact now, that I started to do some self-introspection, because I found myself repeating patterns. And although I didn't have this language for it at the time, what I would tell my clients is that the pattern always reveals the problem. Your results always reveal what you believe about yourself. And it forced me to take a deeper look into who I had become and why I was the way that I was. And so I started going to therapy, meeting with a spiritual guidance counselor. And through that, I acknowledged that this experience was in fact sexual abuse. It wasn't just this joke that I could brush off or, brush under the rug, for lack of a better phrase, and that it had impacted me in a really severe way that caused me to, what I would say, act as if I was fine, as if I had it all together, as if I was successful, even if internally I was suffering
Mm.
and was, struggling. And so that's what really opened the door to not just healing, but to then ascending into other areas of my life, because so much of my energy and my emotions was being directed towards actively suppressing this experience so that I didn't have to deal with the uncomfortable emotions attached to it.
That's incredible. Like, and you said late 20s. I just want to commend you on that, as far as having the self-awareness to even realize that something's up, like to realize that you need help. So many people don't, or suppress it, as you say. I am guilty of that for a period of time, and even seeing in other areas of my life. And I believe people go their entire life without ever really working through that. And so that's really cool that you were able to realize that and work through it. And now your testimony and your story it can be a powerful source to help others and just open up, especially men, right? Like, like I was motivated to write my book because I just saw there was not a lot of men who were talking about it. And like, here I come across you, and I just think that's incredible. And your story is totally different than mine. And so yours was at a Christian summer camp. So obviously I assume that you grew up Christian, right? So did that, so apologize for that. It's not my wake up alarm. It's something I set just to keep my mood going about how I'm feeling at the moment. Anyway, so Christian summer camp. And how did it, or what did that do to your faith or your beliefs? I mean, for something like that happen, and especially as you started to realize, hey, this was something, I was sexually abused, especially as you said you related, did that have an effect, or what did that do to you in your faith?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that. Honestly, not much. Although what I would say that I struggled with was this pervasive discouragement that no matter how much I prayed, no matter how much I read the Bible, no matter how much I went to church, I still found myself repeating these patterns and struggling with these things. At the time, I didn't attribute those issues or those challenges to this experience. And so I wouldn't say it impacted my faith directly, but yeah, there was this pervasive discouragement that came from the fact that I felt the church, in many ways failed to offer me tangible transformation. Right. The church does a really good job in terms of imparting rules to people, and morality through the lens of law and order. But when it comes to like tangible transformation, which is not the same, the church has a long way to go, to be quite frank.
Sure. Yeah.
It has a long way to go. And that's not me dogging the church whatsoever. It's just more of an assessment or an observation, and conversations with people who share a similar sentiment, where they go to church, they do all of the things, and yet they still find themselves struggling with the same issues. And that's because when you think about religion tees you up for a life of performance. It causes us to, and trauma does this as well, or even living in a society that is very much driven by or focused on achievement, success, or the pursuit of accolades. It causes you to, or it causes us to suppress the less than ideal qualities and characteristics about ourselves, and posture and position the ideal qualities and characteristics about ourselves. That creates a pressure cooker. And when you live inside of a pressure cooker, you're gonna need a coping mechanism in order to relieve the pressure.
Man, I mean, wow. Like the pressure cooker analogy I can so relate to. And I'm sorry that the church, I'm with you on that. Like, because I feel similar to that. I grew up Catholic, and while things were going on and things my parents were aware of, because one of the people involved in my abuse was eventually arrested and served like 5 years in prison. But it was still like, let's not talk about it. let's
Sure.
move on. That's in the past.
Yep.
Get over it. I even had a therapist. This is where this is where I didn't have the best introduction to therapy. I had a therapist tell me, "You're fine." So I assume, yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Right.
And then I realized in other things that you've already talked about, but the pressure cooker analogy is so great, and we see it, but we don't even know it. And you talk about this, and I believe that's why you need tools and you need people, and one source isn't alone. And I talk about my faith as a relationship. People will let me down, things will let me down, religions, churches, because we all fall short. But and something I started doing as a person of faith, because I realized, man, I have to make it my own. I have to make it my relationship with Jesus. So like I do this thing occasionally. I did it yesterday, and it's just profound for me. And so I'll share it on here because I've never shared it on the podcast. And I was in like my hot tub, and I closed my eyes and I was meditating, and I put my arm out like as if I was like, sitting next to Jesus, and I just imagined having a conversation with him. It sounds very weird, but it was it was really cool, and like asking questions. So, so do you still find yourself a person of faith, a follower of Jesus, or where are you at with that? And I'd love to hear about that.
Yes, is the short answer. But I would say that I'm more closely aligned with Christian mystics, as opposed to the modern traditional conservative Christian church. Fundamentalism, and this is a whole other topic for a whole other conversation.
No, for sure.
But, fundamentalism, Reformed theology in many ways does a lot of harm to people because it keeps them trapped in this cycle of shame, because they haven't broken free from this law and order stage, which we were always meant to transcend as true believers. That has us very incapable of knowing grace and receiving grace.
Man, I like that. So moving on. So you've talked about it already on here a little bit, and you obviously talk about it in your book and in your influences, and it's the concept of masking trauma with achievement. So can you elaborate on that idea and how it impacts our lives?
Sure. Well, in the first half of life, the focus is very much on the pursuit of power, possession, and prestige, where we are overly focused on answering the question, what do I want? So it's really all about the self, the false self, more specifically, because when we're young children, we all inherently take on personality traits and characteristics of who we think we need to be in order to be loved, accepted, and successful. So as we grow up and as we grow older, our personality is this amalgamation of genuine characteristics, but also these adaptive traits, these compensating characteristics that are not who we genuinely, authentically are, but who we think we need to be in order to be loved, accepted, and successful. And all of that is born out of the avoidance of pain. And so we all start to mask is the short way to put it, right? Personality literally derives from the Latin word persona, which quite literally means mask.
Yeah.
And so we start to take on all of these masks. And I mentioned that I was doing this after my abuse. I started to act as if I was fine, as if I had it all together, as if I was successful. And we find so many men struggling with this today. And that's why, in the work that I do with men, all of men's work starts with the question, what have you been doing with your pain?
What are some of the answers you get?
Most aren't doing anything with it. Most are performing their way around it. And by performing, I mean they're operating from the space of this illusion of this false self, who is not who they authentically truly are, but who they think they need to be in order to be loved, accepted, and successful. That creates tension because inherently it has us at odds within ourselves. And this is why so many men nowadays struggle with anxiety or depression, suicide. All of those things are at an all-time high and they don't know why. And beyond that, they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I totally agree with you 100%. It's what I've seen. And I like the analogy masks, and I've heard it said before, but for some reason when you were saying it, it made me think of the movie. And while the movie Mask with Jim Carrey, while that was comical, it was a good image of like he put on this mask to be super cool, right? And then like he took it off, he wasn't as cool essentially. And we do this, and you said how people do it and they don't even know it. So how do people even know? Like, there might be people listening to this right now and they're thinking, do I have a mask? Am I a mask? Am I who I like, and that in itself will create even more stress, depression, and anxiety. So, is there things that people can start to look for, or what advice do you have for people that are questioning or curious, or even to let them know that, there's the you that you're portraying and then there's the real you. So what advice do you have?
Well, how do you know to answer the question, how do you know if you're operating from this persona, from this false self, or this admired identity, which Father Richard Rohr talks about, is the felt sense of safety that you experience inside of your body. Because if you are operating from the space of this persona, like I mentioned, it is going to create tension, because you find yourself in a pressure cooker where you've got something to prove and you've got something to protect. So how do you feel inside of your body consistently, right? Do you feel pressure in the chest? Do you feel stress in the shoulders, right? All of these are very, very active physical manifestations of what is going on inside of your psyche. Now, obviously, the world in general comes with its fair share of inherent stressors, especially if you're a man providing for the family, right? Taking care of the household, like all of these different responsibilities, especially if you're a business owner, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. It comes with its fair share of inherent stressors. But I think truly that the mark of success for a man is, how does he feel when he's sitting in silence in a room alone? Most men cannot bear to be with themselves in silence, because that's when they're forced to confront who they really are, and they're forced to confront their pain.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, that was me for a while. I was so resistant to like meditation and breath work, and I can so relate to that, and I'm sure many can. I have a friend that we were talking about it, and he struggles with it, and he's been through similar stuff. And so it's one of those things that when I was able to finally do it, I used to justify it too. I'll give this for those that are listening that might relate. I used to, it's my ADD. It's got to be my ADD. That's why I can't do it, right? Or I would justify in other ways. Or I got this thing to do, or I'm too busy, or like, why do I need to do that? Like, make excuses. And then when I started to do it, it opened up a lot. For me, it actually made me more productive, because my mind wasn't as busy. It was able to feel a sense of calmness. And it's a process. It's just like reps in the gym is what I tell people. You got to get your reps in daily. For me, I enjoy it. I can do it myself now, but sometimes I enjoy like cold plunges, or even like laying on like an acupuncture mat, but that's not always the case. So I'm with you. Like that is a step to realizing. I think that I've never thought about like that. If you just go sit in a room and you've never done it and you can't quiet the mind, I usually relate that to, like I talk about it in this next book that I'm coming out with, and it's it's basically talking about comfort through discomfort, or discomfort through comfort. So like finding the comfortable, like how that could be an uncomfortable thing to sit still in a room and quiet the mind, but how comfort can come from it. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you shared that, because that's such a pivotal tip, an important tip to realizing. So what is some of the work that you do? Like, what are some things that you can offer on here or the things that you're doing, people, especially once they figure it out. So once they realize, oh man, I'm not my true self, especially you said entrepreneurs. So there's probably a lot of very professionally successful people, but personally are struggling, right?
I mean, it's a tale as old as time, right? That someone is materially, financially, externally successful, but internally they don't know peace. So yeah, I see this all the time with my clients. And I work with my clients on this all the time, who have created an incredible amount of extrinsic success for themselves, but internally they don't know peace. They struggle to be with themselves. They struggle to slow down. They constantly feel anxious. They struggle to take time off even, right? So even when they're taking time off, they struggle with that. Yeah. They struggle to enjoy themselves. They struggle with an overall level of fulfillment, despite all of their success, despite all of that they've accomplished. And on some deeply inherent level, they feel empty. And so, yeah, we see this all the time. In many ways, that's a sign of unresolved or unreconciled pain. Because when you have unresolved or unreconciled pain, you need to have, like I mentioned, you need to have a coping mechanism. Well, a coping mechanism by definition is an avoidance strategy. And so most men, I mean, I think it's very easy to, for example, as I hesitate to say demonize because that's a really strong word, because coping mechanisms are very necessary until you can learn to self-source in another way, in a healthy way. But drugs, alcohol, pornography, like those are the big three. So like, it's very easy to get behind where we can say like, oh, all of those are really unhealthy. But it's all of the, what I would call or refer to as noble coping mechanisms that are much easier to justify, right? Say, for example, work, justified behind the guise of providing for the family, having a strong work ethic, being growth minded, or wanting to leave a lasting legacy. Or working out and being obsessed with your health and fitness, justified behind the guise of being health conscious. Even serving or caretaking for other people and constantly giving, justified behind the guise of being servant-hearted, right? Or being selfless, right? But that allows you to not focus on yourself.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So,
right. It can be very neurotic behavior. And so, and there's many others that I could go into, but all of these different things are necessary avoidance strategies to enable men specific. I mean, this is true for all people, but it's specifically because I work with men. It enables men to avoid what's actually going on with them internally.
Yeah. And I see this, in anybody that has dealt with trauma. You say men, females, especially men. It's a cultural thing too, right? To be the man. So there's that. Sure. And a lot of things you're saying I've talked about it in my posts, my pages, and you've touched on, I used to chase pain. And so, and so I'll offer up this too, for those that are listening, please don't beat yourself up. And not that you would, but you're probably listening to some of this like, no. Oh, I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of this. And it's a process. It's a lifelong process. Wouldn't you say?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this process, unfortunately, it never ends. Yeah. Like that's both the bad news and the good news, because while we're healing from the past, we're simultaneously incurring new wounds in the present. And so, nature calls it evolution. Religion calls it sanctification. In many ways, it's the same thing. We're all evolving, right? And we're never going to stop evolving until we die. And so, yeah, this is a lifelong process. And so that's why it needs to become a lifestyle for people. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make is they go see a therapist for a year and they're like, I'm good. Or they go to Tony Robbins, UPW. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I think you can get a lot of value.
I'll say what I'm thinking right now.
But they create these, they create these Christian summer camp experiences, which are great for like inspiration and motivation, but you come home and 2 weeks later, you're the exact same person, right? That's just not how change works.
Yeah.
We have to heal if we want to transform. We have to heal if we want to transform. Most people are simply living the same year over and over and over again, and they call it a life. And there's a lot
effect.
of science that actually goes into this.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said the groundhog effect.
There's actually a lot of science that goes into this. Totally. Yep. 100%. There's a lot of science that goes into this that most people, like, I think it's well over 90%, they actually make the same amount of money for the majority of their professional life. They don't, like, it doesn't vary that dramatically. Because when we talk about the conversation around trauma and, psychological development, we all have a threshold in terms of what we feel safe to receive. And this threshold is determined by our life, our lived experiences, our parenting, our conditioning, the environment that we were raised in. So anything beyond that threshold, whether it's love and connection and intimacy, whether it's money and financial abundance, whether it's opportunity within one's career, anything that goes beyond that threshold feels like a threat to our nervous system. And so what do we do in those moments? We self-sabotage, which is just another way to say self-protect. And we see this very prevalently with lottery winners, for example. Over 72% of lottery winners, 18 months later, are either broke or in a worse financial position than they were before having won the lottery.
It's a similar number with professional athletes too, if I believe, especially certain sports. And then you go even down the rabbit hole of ethnicities that I think it's like 72%. And you probably know those too. So I just wanted to bring that up for those that may not have known. It's similar environment. It is.
Yeah. Actually, there's a documentary on, I think it's ESPN 30 for 30 called Broke, where it covers, I believe it focuses on NFL players and NBA players.
I didn't know that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a really great documentary that I want to say it's like over 70% of professional NFL athletes and NBA athletes file for either Chapter 7 or Chapter 11 bankruptcy within 5 years after having retired.
And I know those stats go up if you're like a minority and things of that sort with that.
Well, and that was one of the primary focuses of the documentary was race, because obviously when it comes to being a minority, so many people are subject to different financial climates, right? In terms of the environment that they were raised in,
mindset, that stuff.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Financial fluency in terms of like access to education and access to other financial tools that are much more easily accessible for white people. And so, but from a somatic perspective, from a trauma-informed perspective, because that's what we're really talking about, from a nervous system perspective, right? We experience the world through the lens of our nervous system, right? So for example, to kind of touch back on the book, after my abuse, love and connection fundamentally felt unsafe because it created this fracture where I really struggled to trust people, because here I was having been taken advantage of in a very profound way, in a very painful way. And not only that, but it happened in front of all of my friends that I grew up with, in the church, that I went to school with, and none of them intervened and tried to stop it. And so there were many different layers to the experience that were very, very painful, that caused love and connection, or deep levels of love, intimacy, and connection, to fundamentally feel unsafe in my body. And so my nervous system, whenever I would get to a certain degree or a certain point in terms of love and connection, I would need to self-sabotage in order to return to safety, right? I would need to self-protect. And that often looked like breaking off a relationship for some random or obscure reason. I think a lot of people can probably resonate with that, where it's like, it's just not a fit. I've been fired from every professional job I've ever had, which is why thank God for entrepreneurship.
Right. I mean, that's why I'm here. Similar.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Not every, but like a couple. Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. And so, and I've been clinically diagnosed ADHD as well. So, you can determine how much of that you want to factor into the equation. But nevertheless, all of these different things compiled together impact how we experience ourselves, experience other people, and how we relate to and interact with the world at large. That in many ways determines our overall level of like material success, yes, but also our level of peace and fulfillment.
And it's a daily thing. So yeah, self-sabotage, man. You talked about it in relationships, a similar, especially as I got older. And here's the thing. When I would have like my first real relationship, and I will not say her name, my first serious relationship, she cheated on me. And then it was the next one. And so I'm like, I started to get a false perception of what love was. And I was always so I turned into what you mentioned earlier, like the giving, the serving. And I've always been that way, but I started it wasn't until later on how much I was doing it to overcompensate. But one thing the reason I brought this up is because something else I want people to realize that was for me an experience that took me a while to realize. I was like, I'm good because I'm doing all these good things. I'm telling my story, but I wasn't really receiving. That was big for me to receive. And it was actually Bible verses that I kept seeing over and over again, or like I was reading like this daily thing and it kept talking about receiving. And I read over it like whatever. And it wasn't until one day that I read something and I was like, oh my gosh. And it's what you said earlier, start asking questions even. And I'm like, am I even receiving? And I figured it out. I wasn't. And it started actually, this is how late to the game I was to receiving. I hugged my now oldest daughter, and instead of just giving her a hug, and I literally just held on to her and tried to receive what she was giving. And I cried, man. I'm like, holy crap. For so long, I had a barrier, even in my own child. And I'm give, but wasn't like letting, as you say, love in, man. And then I realized, then my mind started to go down, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I started to realize I wasn't fully giving myself because I wasn't fully receiving from others. So I couldn't really give the best, and it's still a work in progress. I know I'm not exactly where I need to be, but that in itself was a step. And so so I wanted to give that story because it so relates to your book. But you talk about like these moments, I call them awestruck, because it was like that for me. Like the first time I started, like I went through an atheist, like I don't believe in this. I want to argue why it doesn't exist. And then I had an awestruck moment, got saved. But you talk about these Tony Robbins, and it's the daily, weekly, monthly of just waking up, self-improvement, self-awareness. And you talk a lot about that. You talk a lot about self-improvement. So what are some things as far as for people for personal growth, self-improvement, things like that, that you would encourage people that might be dealing with some of these things, especially things that we've been talking about today?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned earlier, we have to heal if we want to transform. If we want to transcend into higher levels of love, abundance, success, opportunity, whatever it may be for you, whatever is truly important, we have to heal before we transform. And so that starts by first and foremost increasing our conscious awareness, because we can't heal something until we are aware of it and the felt impact of that in our lives. As Carl Jung once said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to direct your life and you will call it fate.
The unconscious conscious, yeah.
Right. It's not what we're aware of that hurts us. It's what we're unaware of, because what we're unaware of controls us.
I like that. That's a quote, man. It's not unaware. It's not aware. It's what we're unaware that hurts us, man. That's a good line.
100%. So what we're unaware of controls us. The minute we become aware, now we are in control of it. That's where true change can actually take place. And so I think if I were to offer up a question to increase
anyone who's listening to this podcast episode, increase their conscious awareness, which, like I mentioned, is the first step towards change, would be, if my greatest strength is a compensating strategy, what is my greatest strength for?
So
chew on that one.
Yeah. What is my greatest strength for? And I'll have to sit with that one for sure. And so something I've been thinking this whole time that we've been chatting is there's obviously a large percentage of the population that will listen to this, and especially men, and be like, man, I need to read that book, or I definitely need to change. I need to, that's going to relate. But there's another portion that might be listening to this and like, why the hell do I need to heal? I'm good. Like, that's what I'm a man. I'm good. This is just life. I'm good. Mm-hmm. Why do I need this? Why do I need to heal? What'd you say to them?
Well, here's what I will say. The ego hates being challenged. Mm. So I will say that much. And by ego, I mean like this false self, this false persona that we posture and position that isn't who we truly authentically are. The ego hates being challenged, and the ego hates change more than anything else. Because change feels like death, because we're forced to confront the parts of us that ultimately keep us trapped in limitation.
Right there. Change feels like death. So you're going to be resistant to that. I love that.
Correct. It's going to create resistance. It's going to create resistance. And so we are constantly looking for evidence, however consciously or unconsciously this takes place, to serve as confirmation bias to our existing beliefs and our present identity. I think we can all agree that we want more opportunity. We want a greater degree of happiness. We want more love, more money, whatever it is. But our task is not to seek for those things. Our task is to uncover and discover the barriers within us that stand against those things. So if you want to elevate in any area of your life, right? There's a lot of talk around like goals, especially, this time of year where we're halfway through the year, right? July 1st, right around the corner, reevaluate my goals, maybe set new ones, whatever it may be. Well, if a client ever comes to me and wants support in reaching their goals, before we ever talk about their goals, we have to talk about the things that are currently standing in between them and accomplishing them. Reconstruction without deconstruction is incomplete and insufficient. It's like building a house on sand. You can build a house on sand, but what happens when the storm comes? The home is washed away.
That's biblical right there. Yeah.
Totally.
It's a good analogy.
And so, so many people are trying to create a greater degree of overall success for themselves in their life, whatever that looks like, whether it's in relationship, whether it's within their health, but they don't have the requisite required foundation to be able to hold and maintain and sustain those results long term. So if you want what you say you want, truly, then you have to do the necessary internal work to be able to support those things. Otherwise, like I mentioned, you will get to a certain point of success, of happiness, of fulfillment, and you will self-sabotage for the sake of returning to what you know and what is familiar to you. But I'm never going to try to convince someone to change, because I think we all need to be led to the edge of our own private resources where we don't have the answers at a certain point in time in life, where our strong willpower, all of these mental resources, these adaptive strategies, these coping mechanisms that we have unconsciously taken on in an attempt to maintain the status quo, right? Because that's the number one goal of the ego, is to maintain the status quo. We all need to be led to that point where we don't know what to do and where we don't know where to go.
And we all need help.
And life does that. God does that. I can't do that for someone. I can never want it more for you than you want it for yourself.
So with your experience and the people you work with, what's some of your experience as far as like people's personal beliefs, spirituality, as far as influencing the process of letting love in and healing from past traumas?
Well, spirituality gives us a higher source for living. Like you talked about a relationship, a relationship with God or to a higher power, whatever is true for you is ultimately meant to satisfy that which cannot satisfy, because nothing on this earth, whether it's material, whether it's a relationship or otherwise, was ever meant to fill that void. Grace creates the void that grace alone can fill. And so we truly need spirituality or a relationship with God or to a higher power to provide us with this higher source for living that allows us to transcend the material. Because if anything has proven itself time and time again, money doesn't buy happiness. More only makes you want more. The next level only makes you want the next level. So you realize very quickly that it's a trap, especially if you're an incredibly driven, assertive, growth-minded individual. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with those things by any means, not that you shouldn't want them, because in many ways I do believe that, God gives us the desires of our heart, specifically, but it's the need for those things. It's the attachment to those things that ends up creating suffering for so many people.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating. Like one of my favorite studies was done on indigenous people that are still in the world. And it was a long-term study. It was at least a decade, if not like 20, 25 years. And maybe not that long, but it was a long-term study where they found no signs of like mental illness, mental health in indigenous people of the world. But in our, not necessarily you and me, but like in the world terms, they're poor, right? Because they don't have phones, they don't have what we have. And I find that fascinating too. And it always makes me like, this is me. My imagination runs wild and I love it. And I'm always like curious, like for example, when Europeans came over here, I like to believe Native Americans are feeling pretty good. And then they realize, oh my gosh, and then things change. And here we are today to this state. Well, I'm always just curious at like what point in human history did we decide we need more? I mean, I understand we wanted to build houses or protect ourselves from like saber-toothed tigers and things like that. But this is, you don't have to answer this question. It's just something I want to talk out loudly for people to consider. Like, we know now the indigenous people that are still living on this planet are doing really good. No signs of mental illness. Another study was about like no back issues. And that's something we all suffer, not all, but like a lot of people suffer from, especially here in the Western part of the world, back problems, mental health problems, things you're not seeing in people that are living in the jungle or in the woods or in the wild. So I bring that up because you talk about this, like, where did this come from? They're really happy. There's community. They're connected. But then somewhere in human history decided to start wanting more, building buildings, cars, and all these things. And then that's where I feel like, I'm not saying these things are all bad either, because they're here, right? So we got to figure out and navigate a way. But it's just something that always has been on my mind for a long time. Yeah.
Well, if you think about modern culture is very much predicated on this idea of a separate self, right? And the need to establish oneself. Whereas indigenous cultures, that's not a thing. Right? I got my undergrad in anthropology and sociology, so I actually studied a lot of these cultures that you talk about, in Papua New Guinea, for example. Yep. And so they don't have this notion of a separate self, right? They're intrinsically part of a tribe, part of a community, which is so much bigger than the individual self. However, like I mentioned, in modern culture, there's this overemphasis on the individual self and the need to assert or establish oneself, which is why there is such an emphasis on power, possession, and prestige, achievement, success, and accolades to position oneself or to establish oneself. Whereas in indigenous cultures, it's all about what's of highest good and greatest benefit for the collective. Right? So they're operating at a completely different degree of consciousness. The minute you bring in the concept of the individual self and the need to establish the individual self, you invite in two things. You invite in comparison and competition, which only further bolsters the separation that we experience between the false self and the true self. The greater degree of separation between those two things, the greater the tension, the greater the anxiety, the greater the depression, and the more pervasive and the more likely you are to experience mental health issues.
Yeah, man. So something that was, I preach a lot about, and I'm sure you do too, because it's a cornerstone to letting love in and facing the truth. So letting love in and facing the truth often involves forgiveness, both of oneself and others. And we've tipped on it, but I don't know if we used the word forgiveness yet in this episode. So how can individuals navigate the process of forgiveness, and what benefits can it bring to their lives?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of this paradox how forgiveness in many ways is like the ultimate hit to the ego. But I think if you do this work enough, this interpersonal, transformational healing work that we're talking about, if you do it enough, forgiveness will be an organic response, because you're no longer carrying this baggage, right? You're no longer carrying this baggage that you've held so tightly onto to preserve, right, these certain beliefs or this identity that you've held onto for so long as a means to self-protect. You're going to let those things go. And in the process of letting go, you're naturally going to gravitate towards forgiving other people, because you realize very quickly that forgiveness is really the only way that you can truly move on. Right? It's kind of like the last step.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's actually baked into every 12-step program, at least that I know of, is self-forgiveness. And then it's forgiveness of other people. And so I think you're going to organically be called to forgive so that you can actually embrace peace, because, you know, it's law that two things can't occupy the same space at the same time. It's the law of it's Newton's law.
I like how you
if
put that.
I am resentful, if I am bitter, if I am recycling those emotions and embodying those emotions, because emotions get stored in our muscle tissue fibers, in our fascia, then other higher vibrational emotions cannot occupy that space in my body, in my psyche, in my mind. It can't. And so in order to let more love in, right, in order to invite a greater degree of peace and joy and fulfillment, I have to get rid of those things. I have to. Otherwise, they're going to block me from receiving more of those higher vibrational emotions, like love, like joy, like peace. So, yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to worry about it. I don't think there's like a formula necessarily. But what I will say is I do think that like forgiveness is a choice. I think it's a decision. And I think it's important to understand that readiness has nothing to do with a state of being. Readiness is always a decision. Readiness has nothing to do with circumstances. It has nothing to do with a state of beingness. It has everything to do with a decision. So you make a decision to forgive someone and to let go and move on. And of course, that's an active process. But if you do this enough, this work enough, eventually you're going to want to and be prompted to let go of the pain of the past, and the resentment, the bitterness, the anger, the frustration that you harbor towards others, because you recognize, however conscious you are of this, that in order to access a greater degree of love, joy, peace, then you have to let those things go.
Yeah. And for me, it was earlier on, like for my mindset, and we're talking young, I was, it wasn't anything other than my own. I didn't want to feel, I don't know. I didn't want to feel like shackled. I don't want to feel controlled by somebody that is no longer like something that they did in my past. So I felt, man, as long as I allow this to not forgive, to bother me, this wasn't even faith, because at this point when it came around, I wasn't even really, I was at that point where I was like challenging Christianity. So this was more just, I didn't read any books. I just, one day I was like, I feel shackled and I don't want to feel shackled. And that's how I put it. Now that's not, it's evolved since then for sure, but it's very, I never even thought about it until you said something. So I want to, you said, I forgot how you put it, but it just becomes a part of you. Like, it's so easy for me to forgive these days. Like literally, like somebody hit my vehicle a couple months ago. And as soon as it happened, I was like, whatever. And they were surprised that I was so kind and helpful and nice and smile. I'm like, it was an accident. We're good. It's all right. Are you okay? Like,
well, because you don't want to be burdened by the weight of those emotions.
But I never thought about it like that. So I'm glad you brought that up, man. Yeah, I didn't want to be burdened, but I don't consciously think at this point, I don't want to be burdened like the steps. You're right. I don't do that. I never thought about it. It just becomes a part. So I'm glad you said that. So the more you work through that process, so that takes me to the next question. And it's like, letting love in and facing the truth can be challenging for many people, right? We've touched on it for sure throughout this episode, but what advice do you give someone who may be hesitant or afraid to embark on this journey, self-discovery and healing? So we've gotten past the guy, why do I need to heal, to, okay, this is hard,
Sure.
I'm hesitant. I'm scared.
I think that our lives, our relationships, our financial situation, our businesses expand directly in proportion to our willingness to confront our pain and our past. Because until we reconcile the pain from the past, we will inevitably recycle it into the present moment. We will. And this is why a lot of people, I'm sure you've heard this before, just because of how, involved you are in the personal development space, where, I don't feel like I'm in a relationship with you. I feel like I'm in a relationship with your trauma, right? Or I don't feel like I'm in a relationship with you. I feel like I'm in a relationship with your mother. Really just all fancy ways of saying, like, I feel like I'm in relationship to your pain right now, not who you really are, not your authenticity, your true self. I'm being confronted by, the pain from the past in this moment that's simply being projected onto me or manifesting itself by way of this conversation, this situation, or this incident. And so I think our lives expand directly in proportion to with our willingness to confront our pain and reconcile our past. And yes, that's tough, but it's tough either way. And it's just like investing. There's a cost to everything. There's a cost to investing. There's also a significant cost to not investing. There's a cost to doing this work, right? The uncomfortable nature of it, but there's also a cost to continuing to carry these things around, because as you pointed out, they burden people. And there's a ton of science that goes into this. Like, there's actually, every emotion has a vibrational frequency. So if you're carrying around shame or guilt because of something that you've done or because of something that has happened to you in the past, like I can definitively say that as a result of what happened to me, I carried around a ton of shame. I was humiliated. I was embarrassed because of what happened, because it didn't happen in silence or in secrecy. It happened in front of a bunch of other people, and tons of people knew about it. Everyone in my high school knew that this happened.
Man.
And so there was a ton of shame around this incident. It followed me around. And it wasn't until I released that shame was I able to access freedom. So there's a cost to everything. I think you need to determine within yourself, what cost do you want to pay? Do you want to, pay the price of like momentary or temporary suffering for the sake of freedom? Because, there's different forms of freedom. There's freedom of restriction and there's freedom of restraint. Freedom of restraint requires that you tie yourself down to something, right? If you want to really get in shape, you kind of have to tie yourself down to health and fitness. You got to be consistent in going to the gym. You got to be consistent when it comes to prioritizing eating healthy and investing in those types of things. Piano, if you want to become really good at piano, you got to practice. You got to tie yourself down to it. And so there's always a cost. It just comes down to what cost do you ultimately want to pay and what cost is going to be greater. Because in my experience, life only continues to get easier. For 15 plus years, when I wasn't addressing these things, life just continued to get harder. Yes, I was able to avoid confronting the pain of the past, but I was continually and consistently making it real and manifesting it in the present.
Yeah. So I would assume that you would say, like, even on, like, I doubt, maybe you do, but I doubt you wake up every day as like rainbows and unicorns, and maybe you do, but even on the challenging days, your motivation to keep doing the work is knowing that what you just said there, that it gets better, that it brings you more freedom, as the words you use, as opposed to where you were. I correlate it to almost like a video game. Like if you keep making the same mistakes or going down the same path, you're never going to make it to level 2. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more I do this work, the better my relationship thrives, the more love, intimacy, connection we experience in our relationship, the more money, financial abundance I make, because now I don't have the burden or like the tethers of these lower vibrational emotions like shame or guilt or bitterness, resentment, anger, whatever it may be. I am able to step into the energy of creation because now I don't have those emotions. I've released those emotions. I've processed those emotions. I've transcended those emotions. And now I'm able to step into creativity, right? If you're in survival, it's very, very difficult to step into creativity. If you think about it, most people are living in survival. Most people have something to prove. They have something to protect, right? And what are they trying to prove? They're trying to prove that like I am lovable or I am worthy. But the underlying resonance beneath that is I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. And so all of their actions are just to kind of prove that narrative wrong. And it's cloaked in the energy of prevention. And so when you're in survival, when you're operating in that way, it's very hard to step into purpose, step into creativity, express yourself authentically, because you're being burdened by these other things. When you're drowning, the only thing that you're concerned about is your next breath. And that's where most people are. That's how most people live.
Yeah. And even if you find yourself in a successful category monetarily or some of the categories you mentioned, there's layers and levels. So if you haven't fully released or found your true self, you might feel like I'm in a good place. I'm a multimillionaire. I'm doing all these great things, or wherever you're at. Yeah, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this title, I'm that title. But realizing that if there's still things that are essentially holding you back, or like you put it, you're drowning and trying to catch your breath of sorts, that it's having that self-awareness and just doing that and being open to the vulnerability of the work that you need to do. So, man, we could talk forever. We do need to wrap it up here soon. Is there anything else you wanted to share just on like what I just mentioned there as far as like that? And then I have a couple more questions, but it's just, how do people really, discuss the importance of vulnerability, or how do they even know where to start with the self-awareness? Do they need to go seek out a therapist? Could they do some of these things on their own?
I mean, yes, I think reading books, listening to podcasts like this one are a great first step. But like I mentioned, the number one goal of the ego is to maintain the status quo. How does it do that? It hides the truth from you. Until we make the unconscious conscious, it will continue to direct your life and you will call it fate. Every hero needs a guide. Whenever I have a prospective client ask me, why should I work with you? I'm like, it's very easy. I see what you can't. I see what you can't. 90 to 95% of our behavior is driven by our unconscious mind, right? We all have blind spots. And so at a certain point in time, we're only capable of growing so much alone. Eventually, if you really want to continue down this path of growth, mastery is all about the nuances and the details. That requires working with a professional, whether it's a clinician, whether it's a coach, whether it's someone who has a proven track record for success. At a certain point in time, you have to invite in mentorship and coaching with someone who's capable of pointing out your blind spots, who's capable of saying, okay, let's look at the patterns, because the pattern always reveals the problem. Let's look at the patterns because the patterns paint a perfect picture and they tell a really beautiful story about what we believe about ourselves and ultimately what's holding us back. And therein lies the opportunity.
You mentioned a little bit earlier, like, not being in a relationship with other people's trauma and being in a natural relationship with people. So even like other people. So that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people. But how do you, this is what you do. This is what you help people. Yeah. How do you, what's the word I want to say here? How do you still create that keep that healthy mindset, keep those boundaries of sorts, or don't be burdened or that become a part of you? Like how do you do that?
So I do believe that there's 200% ownership in every relationship. There's your 100%, and then there's my 100%. I think if people were actually able to be a fly on the wall for, I'll say, quote unquote, arguments between my partner, Carrie, and myself, and I say arguments, quote unquote, because they're not really arguments. It's kind of us
you do
filtering,
a lot of this, right? Slapping each other. I'm just kidding.
You're right. yeah, totally.
But I'm sorry.
You're good. We're constantly, throughout the course of the conversation, we're filtering through and navigating what's mine, what's yours, right? Like what is mine to own, but what is not mine to own. And so, okay, I'm not going to take that on, and I'm not going to make you wrong about it, but I'm going to at least bring awareness to the fact that, like, I feel you're projecting something onto me in this moment. So it's very conversational. It's not accusatory. Rarely do we ever get upset. I don't know that we've ever really yelled at one another, because our default instinct or impulse is one of curiosity and openness. And so, we approach conflict through that way or in that way. And it allows us to ask questions around, like, what's the real challenge here for you? Or what is it that you need from me in this moment to be at peace? Or is, like, there's something I didn't do that I said I was going to do, that I went back on my word. I'm going to own that. But that's the thing. People have such a difficult time apologizing or admitting they're wrong, for example, because of the cognitive dissonance that it creates, right? Because of the rub and the resistance that it creates. That's why change is so difficult. The number one goal of the ego is to maintain the status quo. Cognitive dissonance is a way in which it achieves that, because of the resistance that we experience whenever we experience a paradigm shift. Whenever we're confronted by the possibility of needing to acknowledge when we're wrong, or to say, hey, you know what? I think there's something there in what you're saying. think there's some truth there, and I should probably chew on that. I should probably explore it, contemplate it, consider it. That it takes a very, very humble human to do that, first and foremost, a very strong, courageous human to be able to do that, because our ego sees that as a death. I can no longer be that person who at one point in time was a staunch Democrat. So I have to let that part of me die. Right? Because now I see, like, I don't know, I see the inherent wisdom that comes with being, more conservative or a Republican, and like the different various beliefs that they maintain. This is not me like advocating for conservatism.
No, I know what you're saying. No, I know what you're saying. My parents popped in my head.
There's a death there.
Yeah. My parents popped in my head because, like, when I was growing up as a kid, and I was like in the grunge arena, and I'm just thinking back to, like, I had ear piercings and I was doing all these things, and they considered me some liberal hippie, and I'm like, I don't even care about politics, but they're like, just wait till you're our age, you'll become more conservative, and they are conservative, they are Republicans, they claim the title, but it's just that's what I thought about, and so anywho,
well, that's the journey, isn't it? Right? Yeah. We initially, in the beginning, we overcompensate, and then we decompensate, and then after that we properly compensate.
The tone that I get from you during this entire episode is people are essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, are essentially striving for peace, joy, happiness, those titles, but may not even know it, and they're trying to find it in other arenas, whether it be binge watching shows, in fireworks, in vices, in sex, in drugs, and it's in the tips and the tools that you're offering seem simple, but not always easy, and a lot of it's going to come from within. But to come from within, you need help.
Yeah, we're only capable of getting so far and growing so much without support. Yeah. Because we're all our own worst enemy.
Right.
Like, isn't that, I think we can all agree on that at this point in time, that we're all our own worst enemy. No one enables us more than we enable ourselves. And so at a certain point in time, we have to invite in a certain level or a certain degree of support. I do think, in terms of doing this work on your own, I think that can get you started. But what's going to keep you going? It's absolutely going to be the support of other people. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah, it's something that just came into my head, and I look at a mirror as a good analogy for this. And many times it's hard to look in the mirror on our own selves, and sometimes we just need somebody to support our head and look and tell them that you are loved, you are great, I'm here to help. Just to hold that chin up and look in there with you, and really see the real self, not the ugly version that is being masqueraded around. 100%. Man, I really appreciate this. We definitely are going to wrap it up here, but we could definitely talk more. I really enjoy this podcast. Is there any other thing, the title of this podcast is Strive 365, that you could offer or provide, whether it be yourself or anybody else, just help them strive personally, professionally, just to live a better life every day?
Yeah, I think a lot of good can come by way of journaling and increasing one's conscious awareness, which is the first step towards change. So contemplating, considering, journaling on the question, if my greatest strength is a compensating strategy, what is my greatest strength for? But as far as the book, you can get the book on Amazon. You can get it via my website, which is awakewithjake.com. Best place to interact with me, I think you already put it up there, is my Instagram.
Yeah, we'll have all this Kauffman in the show notes for sure. Yeah, because definitely check that book out, guys. I need to get a copy, but yeah, it's definitely up there in the category, definitely for anybody, but definitely men. And I'll tell you this, even if you've may not been experiencing this, Think about it as a gift, or think about it as yourself to help understand people that might have been involved. Because I think that's another challenge with people. If you don't understand, then there could be judgment. There could be a lot of things going on. And I just think we need to have more sympathy with those that might have been affected this way, to partially even try to understand, so you could be more of an ear for those type of people, and maybe even a guider to guide them in the right direction or the right person. Well, thanks again, Jake. Appreciate you, man. Good luck and God bless with everything out there. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of Strive 365. If you did like this podcast, which we know you did, and you found value and know somebody that will, please, this is totally free, done for you, free content. So like, share, and subscribe. We are on all channels, from YouTube to iTunes podcast or Apple Podcasts and Google and the likes. So send it out there, because that is one way of serving and helping others, by just sharing, liking, or commenting on this episode. Thank you again, and take care.